Situation on Capitol Hill is U.S. Representative Mark Sanford here from South Carolina.
Congressman, always glad to have you here in the studio with us. We appreciate your time. This is hot off the press, as we like to say, this memo coming from Senator Graham's office calling on Comey's friend, we know as Professor Daniel Richman, to provide those memos on his conversations with the president. What is your reaction to the senator's actions demanding that this be presented?
I think the senator's right on this one. The more information we can get, the quicker, the better. I think this thing has really the capacity to freeze up legislative action in Washington, D.C. Yesterday it was interesting. It was almost as if it was a sporting event or something. You walked down the halls of the Capitol and offices were pulling up chairs and glued to a television watching the Comey hearing. And that's ultimately something that hurts all of us, because that means they're not working on tax policy, they're not working on what's coming next on the budget, and a whole host of issues that are important to people's lives here in the Low Country.
Yeah, what's going on in Washington? I mean, here you see everyone seems to be fighting. No one seems to be trusting each other, and some people are saying Washington's broke. Broken.
Well, it's getting more broken by the minute, and that's what's frightening. So I think it's important, going back to what senators call for, let's get as much information out there as quickly as possible. Let's get to the bottom of it, and let's move on.
Do you think that James Comey broke any laws, though, by leaking that information?
That'll be the subject of intense and continued debate, and it'll probably be viewed in partisan terms. Republicans will say yes, he broke laws, Democrats will say no, and independents will be saying, I'm just totally confused, this whole thing seems like a real mess. And so I think, again, all of us are losers in this equation. There's a lot of back and forth, but that back and forth means, one, is that trust is continuing to erode in Washington, D.C. between people back home and people in Washington, and work isn't getting done. And the normal Congress will have 2 or 3 big issues. This one has 7 or 8. It has some profoundly important issues tied to the debt ceiling, tied to budget, tied to tax reform, tied to health care, that really have to get dealt with here in this session.
The story that we just saw airing there, with the president finally talking to the testimony that happened yesterday, says total and complete vindication. Do you agree with that?
We'll find out. I mean, that's the problem with this.
Yeah.
You have one version of truth we heard yesterday. You have another version of truth, and so you have complete conflicting reports. Somebody's not telling the truth. We'll find out who.
We also heard James Comey say that the president lied. What is your reaction to that, to hear those words from him yesterday in testimony that the president lied when it came to why he was fired as the FBI director?
Again, I go back to what I just said. They're both saying the other guy lied. One of them is right. We don't know yet who, but I think going back again to whether it's this document that senators call for or a whole host of others, it's important that we kind of cut to the chase on this one and get to the bottom line, because until then, Washington, to a greater degree than we'd all like to see, is frozen up.
Really stalls his agenda too, doesn't it, President Trump's?
It does. You know, legislative bodies have the capacity to deal with 1, maybe 2 issues at a time, but not beyond that. And when all of a sudden you're dealing with all this sensational stuff, I mean, and important stuff, I mean, but nonetheless, attention-grabbing and sensational stuff, it detracts people. I mean, this was to be Infrastructure Week in Washington, D.C. That was what the White House had laid out as the messaging for the week. That hadn't proved to be the case.
And Congressman, as we talk about Washington being fractured, does that mean that the country remains fractured as a result of not being able to move forward in a lot of different ways?
No, the country at the end of the day is amazingly healthy, and its institutions are in place. So you have a private sector that continues to go out and do business, and you have educational sector and health. A lot of different institutions in this country are working, but right now our representative body and the way we come together in Washington, I don't think is working particularly well, and it should be troubling to all of us.
All right, so what should we expect next from you?
Well, we're trying to shoot it right down the middle, which is to say, you know, I've challenged, for instance, Trump on a number of different things, whether that's the issue of releasing tax returns or most recently in the budget assumptions they used in building their budget, because I didn't think the numbers were valid. But I've been equal opportunity on the other side. And I think that's where most people are. They're not extreme right, they're not extreme left. They're saying, wait a minute, how do we get things done in Washington, D.C., based on a conviction, and I'm a conservative, unabashedly so, based on a conviction, but how do we actually get some things done? And that's something that is sort of frozen in the mix right now. So what I'm going to continue to do is, for instance, I'm on the Budget Committee. We will mark up the budget come week after next and try and work toward a sensible budget that I think represents the different priorities of a whole lot of folks here in the Low Country.
Crunching numbers.
A lot of numbers.
A lot of
numbers.
Always good to see you.
Yeah,
Always
thank you.
good to
Pleasure.
see you. Thank
U.S.
you.
Representative Mark Sanford joining us to talk about all things Washington. Thank you.
Pleasure.